Welcome to Freethinking 101, a course unlike any you have ever taken before. We invite you to question your traditional ideas and open your mind. It's brought to you by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis, and I'm Barbara Stocker. Tonight we have with us Pat Inniss, who's going to be discussing religion in the Third Reich. Nazi Germany is often cited as one of the darkest moments in human history. Yet Germany was and is what many would consider a Christian nation. So we need to look at the role that religion played in that tragedy and see what lessons could be learned. Pat, the fascist movement was well underway by the time Hitler and the Nazis took over Nazi Germany. What was organized religion's reaction to Nazism at that time?
Well, actually, Barbara, the initial reaction was rather opportunistic. It was a good opening for the church, the Catholic Church especially, I guess, is going to be one of the primary subjects of our talk tonight, an opportunity for the churches, and the Catholic Church in particular, to really firm up some of their relations with the governments, the fascist governments, because under the fascist governments there was really no what we think of as a wall of separation between church and state. They were very willing to, being of course concerned with propaganda, with mind control and things like that, they were very willing to use the churches as an institution to project the kind of propaganda, the kind of philosophy they wanted the people to adhere to. I guess one of the first examples of the church working hand in hand with a fascist government was quite naturally with Mussolini's government. In February of 1929, Pope Pius XI signed the Lateran Accords with Mussolini. Now, the primary purpose of this agreement was to clean up a lot of baggage that had been left laying around since dating all the way back to the Holy Roman Empire.
Like what?
Well, there was a lot of contention about what the church owned, what property the church owned. The Pope, in some ways, could legitimately claim control over vast portions of what we now know as Italy because of all the different agreements and histories of the different governments that, like I say, dated way back to the Holy Roman emperors and all that. So he negotiated with Mussolini, Pope Pius XI negotiated with Mussolini this Lateran Accord. The primary facets of that was that the Vatican renounced claims to the Papal States. That was a biggie. The Vatican received sovereignty for Vatican City, 109 acres in Rome. That was took on the legal stature of a sovereign state.
That's still in place today.
Right. They received 750 million lira in cash. Some of that had to be reinvested in Italian bonds, and they got $1 billion lira in 5% consolidated bonds. And also, Catholicism was recognized as a state religion in Italy. The Catholic Action Group, which was kind of a social organization, social action, benevolent organization, was one of the Pope Pius XI's pet projects. That was given official state recognition, and the church buildings were restored by the state. They footed the bill to restore a lot of old churches. Freemasonry, Methodism, and heresy were sometimes punishable by law. So you see, here we have a lot of church law and state law overlapping, and a part of
interweaving there.
Right, right. Dancing and partying became illegal during Lent. Theater and movie censorship were tightened, and church marriages were required. So secular services were no longer sufficient. So you see, the church really got a lot of power out of this. They got a lot more influence. They increased their position tremendously.
And control over the individual's lives.
Right. Now, why would Mussolini do something like this? Well, he had a very good motive, because the fascists were, at the time, Mussolini. A lot of people saw Mussolini for what he was. He was, well, you could call him a tin-horn dictator, or a person with very little moral authority to be in a position that he found himself. But signing an accord with the Pope somehow raised him up to a level that he couldn't really hope to attain through any other means. So after that, he had to be taken a little bit more seriously in diplomatic circles.
Okay, sure.
But
well, oh,
I just wanted to mention
okay.
this one quote is a little bit too good for me to miss. Pope Pius XI was quoted as saying, "He gave Italy back to God and God back to Italy." Now you sign a treaty with a guy like Mussolini, and saying that it's got anything to do with God is a little far-fetched. But these concordats like this really weren't unusual. They had signed, the Vatican had signed concordats with Yugoslavia, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, all about the same time. But also, the one last thing the church did was, in 1929, the clergy instructed the parishioners to vote for fascist candidates to indicate their support for the Pope and these Lateran Accords.
Okay. Boy, that quote sounds a whole lot like what I'm hearing out of some people
You can imagine
today,
Pat
right
Buchanan
here.
saying that, maybe.
Something like that. Well, Pat, it isn't unusual at all for the Catholic Church to be involved in the government affairs of countries like Italy and Spain that are primarily Catholic. But Germany was mostly Lutheran. Was the Catholic approach in Germany any different from what it was in the Catholic countries?
Well, it wasn't a whole lot different. There was one big factor here, though. There were a lot of Catholics in Germany, and particularly in Austria, but Adolf Hitler himself was a Catholic. So he was very familiar with the Catholic Church. There was sort of a natural acceptance of Hitler, a tendency really, I guess, to view Hitler a little bit more differently from the Catholic Church than if he had been a Lutheran. But this really made all the difference in the world, apparently, because the Catholic Church seemed to, for some reason, trust Hitler perhaps more than they should have because of the fact that he was Catholic. Now, as a Catholic, Hitler had a certain attitude toward Protestants. Hitler was quoted as saying some very disparaging things about Protestants, and this perhaps also had was a certain factor in the way in Hitler's politics. But it's interesting because some of these religious politics played a certain part in some of the things that happened. The Anschluss, when the German Nazis took over Austria, and this was in March of 1938. Now, one of the factors here was that Austria was very heavily Catholic. When you put very heavily Catholic Austria in with Germany, which was mostly Lutheran, but with a large Catholic population, you really balanced the religious power there to a great degree. So the Catholics in Germany were overjoyed when this happened, when Austria was combined with Germany and gave them greatly increased power. At this time, it was a very controversial move involving a lot of intrigue, but it's charged that the Catholics in Austria actually undercut the opposing parties, which would be the parties in Austria opposing the Nazis, which would be the Social Democrats. Now, one factor here was that the Social Democrats were identified with the leftists and Bolshevists, but there was also the aspect that the Catholics opposed the Social Democrats because the Social Democrats opposed the Nazis, and the Nazis were supporting the unification of Austria with Germany. So what you saw happening was when Hitler's forces marched into Germany, the church bells rang, church officials met Nazis at the border. The Austrian Cardinal Inniss and his bishops ordered Catholics to vote approval for this union in the plebiscite, which was held later. Now, of course, the plebiscite wasn't a plebiscite just of the Austrian people. It was a plebiscite of the German and Austrian people about this unification. So it wasn't too surprising that the plebiscite was approved. Also, there were intimidation as well as the Catholic clergy instructing, again, the voters which way to vote. But these are things that all came together to to really make the relationship between the Catholic Church and the German government rather tight.
It's, yeah, it sounds like it's very close there, but wasn't the anti-Semitism showing up in the Nazis, and wasn't the Vatican put off by that at all?
Well, you would think so. I mean, from the perspective of history, you see what happened, and you wonder why nothing was done. I guess this is really the big question that comes out of the whole era when you examine Christian morality, the role of the Catholic Church in World War II. You wonder why the anti-Semitism especially wasn't something that they. Well, the answer, I think, is that there was actually a lot of sympathy from the Christians for the anti-Semitism that took place. If you look at the German culture, they have a passion play in Bavaria, which very strongly stresses the theme of Jewish deicide. And this is a recurring theme throughout a lot of Christianity, which is really the basis of some of the. I found the reference to anti-Semitism here. This was from Christianity Today. This is a kind of an example, really a periodical that's kind of evangelically oriented, but toward the more conservative Christians, I think there's been a lot of denial about the role of Christianity and about this reality of anti-Semitism within the mainstream of Christianity. But here it says, it's written by Richard Pierrot, a professor of history at Indiana State University, says, it is also, talking about the Holocaust, it is also an American Christian problem. We must never forget that anti-Semitism has its roots in the theology and practice of the Christian Church, from the writings of the Church Fathers through the Inquisition, and even in the comments of Martin Luther. And I think that's a very straightforward statement of what the problem is. Talking about Martin Luther in particular and identifying anti-Semitism as related to German Christianity especially. I mean, Martin Luther was one of the worst offenders. He favored ejection of Jews in really a language that could have later served for the Nazi policies and their oppression of Jews. I do have a quote here. He says, Jews are to be deprived of, quote, all their cash and jewels and silver and gold, and that, quote, their synagogues or schools should be set on fire, that their houses be broken up and destroyed, and that they be put under a roof or stable like gypsies in misery and captivity as they incessantly lament and complain to God about us. Now this is from the 16th century.
Sounds pretty strong.
But another interesting thing about Martin Luther is, in addition to being an anti-Semite, he also advocated very strict obedience of political authority. And here you see in the oppression of the Jews by the Nazis, these two factors can converge. There's this religious thing of prejudice against the Jews, but there's also obedience to religious authority. So on the one hand, you've removed some of the moral objections to anti-Semitism because you've given it the church approval. You've really buttressed anti-Semitism with religious mythology and practice and tradition. And even if it was there, you've told people that you should be obedient to your political leaders. Now,
but the concept of obedience does keep coming up in German philosophy, obedience to the strong father figure, obedience to the government, obedience to the fatherland. I mean, that's a pretty strong theme.
Yeah, it is. And it's something that was pivotal in this whole episode.
What about the play The Deputy? Weren't some of the Catholic Church's roles raised in the 60s in that play?
Yeah. That I guess was rather notorious. That was one of the, I think. Well, this whole theme isn't really new. All the charges about the Catholic Church's role in the events of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. But this really brought it front and center and made some very, very strong allegations about Pope Pius the 12th. And you see, Pope Pius the 12th was, during the time that the Vatican, these concordats were being signed with Mussolini and Hitler, he was the Vatican Secretary of State, so he was in some way the architect of many of these policies. His name was Eugenio Pacelli, and he later became, after the death of Pope Pius XI, he became Pope Pius XII, and was still Pope during the early 60s, at the time that the deputy, I think that he was still alive when the deputy first premiered. Now, part of the notoriety, of course, of this play was built upon the very violent reaction that the Catholic Church had to the allegations, and they, I wouldn't say that their position is totally without merit. It's a question of what they did do and what they didn't do, and when you examine the Catholic Church and their role in this episode, you can say yes, there were times when there were Jews, a number of Jews, thousands of Jews perhaps, saved through the actions of the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Well, more individuals.
Yeah, there were some Catholics, say in diplomatic positions. Some of the Catholics did have diplomatic stature. Mm-hmm. They were able to use this to help fleeing Jews. On the other hand, considering that Germany and Austria together were over 40% Catholic, you wonder why there wasn't a more severe imposition of sanctions on the Germans, the Catholic Germans who were participating in.
Well, Pat, did the Catholic Church ever wake up and realize what was going on and react to these Nazis?
Well, they did. It's funny though, because when you look at the reaction, what happened, you think that they reacted to the things that weren't, from our perspective, really weren't as serious. The things that they got upset about really weren't the things that you might expect them to get upset about in terms of Nazi policy. One thing that happened in 1935, this is a rather dramatic incident. In November of 1935, at the Sportspalast in Berlin, there was a Dr. Reich Krauss gave a speech. Now, they'd been developing this whole concept of somehow developing a religion that would be appropriate for the German people, a religion that would be free of the Semitic influence that they would say infects Christianity. Now, in 1935, this Dr. Krauss gave a speech before, I imagine, a rather large audience. You know, that it's one of these big Nazi rallies. He came up with his blueprints for a religion for Germans. Now, he decided to eliminate the Old Testament, for starters. A lot of people have said that they wanted to eliminate the Old Testament, but he had different reasons. He wanted to rewrite the New Testament to make Christ's teachings really coherent with Nazi dogma. Now, he wouldn't have been, once again, the New Testament and Christ, the rewriting of the New Testament and Christ's teachings, that's been done before, not recently perhaps. He wanted to require ministers to take an oath of allegiance to Hitler. Now, this is something that they'd already done with the Army. The Army no longer took an oath of allegiance to the German Constitution. They took it directly, personally, to Hitler. This is something he wanted all Christian ministers to do as well. Pardon me. And then he wanted an Aryan paragraph in church policy to exclude ethnic Jews. Now, this was the injection of racism into Christianity in a much less subtle form than it was at that time, although it was rather easy for the Nazis to come back and point to an order such as the Jesuits, who had their history, you know, they can trace their history back to the Inquisition, and say, well, the Jesuits have had policies which have precluded Jews from becoming members of their order. So this is not really that far off, but the Christians reacted rather strongly to this because they realize now that what the agenda was of the Nazis and how the Nazis were in fact going to co-opt religion, going to really going to really occupy the space that religion had occupied traditionally. The Nazis did not see a line between party politics and religion. They didn't see a line between propaganda and religion.
Okay, they just kind of moved their policies right into the existing structure, is what it sounds like they did.
It was their intention to really combine these and make the church subservient. But one of the formal, I guess, the strongest formal response to this growing encroachment of Nazism on religion was an encyclical in March 1937. The title of the encyclical was Redender Sorge, which meant with burning sorrow. And it was read from pulpits across the country on Palm Sunday. It was written in part by a Cardinal Faulhaber, who really had been all over the map in terms of his view of what Nazism and Hitler were. But this was, Cardinal Faulhaber was responding to the German oppression of the church. The Germans had, when they signed the agreement when the Concordat with Germany, when Hitler and the Pope got together to agree on their Concordat, as Mussolini and the Pope had agreed, there became a lot more involvement of the state in the running of the schools. Actually, the church schools, the Catholic schools, came under state support, very much like people in the United States want the schools to be under state support. But when you deal with the Nazis, you realize that when they are paying your bills, they get to call the tune. And the Germans had been taking increasing steps to control the teaching of Christian Catholic dogma in these schools. It's kind of ironic because up to this point, the Catholics had made increasing efforts to court the Nazi government. They really wanted to have the advantages, the benefits of their relations with all the state support. The Nazi Party initially, when they signed the agreement with the Catholics, they went so far as to order their stormtroopers to go to church. That might have created a pretty impressive spectacle, all the stormtroopers marching off the church. But the relationship turned sour soon after that. But the Catholics actually offered to help the Nazis by supporting their campaign in Spain. This was the time of the Spanish Civil War. Now, a lot of people will say that the Catholic Church already were supporting the Nazis in Spain. That was part of the problem for a lot of Spaniards, was that the Catholic Church was on the wrong side in that conflict, or at least the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, the officialdom of the Catholic Church, was already supporting the Nazis. But the Nazis said, "Hey, we don't need you. We're winning this war just fine without you. Who needs?" But they attacked, things like the interference in the church. They attacked the Nazi policy of blood and soil, which equated faith in Germany to faith in God. They attacked neo-paganism. This was another trend in Nazism. They criticized Hitler for his aspirations of divinity. Now, this is after a number of theologians made very strong statements in support of Hitler, and they called him a mad prophet.
What were Hitler's religious views? Do we know that?
Yeah, we do know that, actually. I guess there was this book out some time ago called The Atheist Syndrome, and it was written by a fundamentalist-oriented Christian, very critical of atheists, of course. One of the things he tried to use to bolster his argument was that Hitler was an atheist. Now, we already noted that Hitler was a Catholic. Those were his roots, at least. He wasn't a practicing Catholic. He didn't attend church. Maybe he referred to God for rhetorical purposes only, but there was a statement. I mentioned Cardinal Faulhaber a few minutes ago, but let me read you this. He had a meeting with Hitler at Berchtesgaden on the 4th of November 1936, and he came out and gave this statement. Unlike governments in the days of parliamentary controversy, he doesn't let matters drift, but steers their course. Withal, he can be solemn and almost soft, as when he says, The individual is nothing. He will die. Cardinal Faulhaber will die. Adolf Hitler will die. This makes one inward and humble before the Lord. The chancellor, there is no doubt, lives in a state of belief in God. So here's a cardinal in 1936 saying that Hitler is a man of God.
Well, that's what it certainly sounds like he is. Pat, what conclusions can we draw about religion's role in Nazi Germany?
Well, I think that the main thing is when you look at it, you see a failure, a failure of moral leadership. The church was totally unable to effectively present any opposition to the tragedy that occurred in Nazi Germany. As we noted before, they didn't really do anything to really. They did help some. Granted, they did have a large number of Jews escape at some risk to certain church officials. But whatever happened to the power of excommunication? Whatever happened to statements directly dealing with the issue of anti-Semitism? I mean, they did put up a protest when the Nazis went around and took the crucifixes down in their schools, or when the Nazis tried to substitute some other mythology for Christianity. But what about the mass numbers of Jews being destroyed in gas chambers and crematoriums? They threatened to excommunicate people over participating in duels here. Nowadays in the United States, you hear the threat of excommunication being leveled against legislators who support the right to control your own reproductive system.
Yeah.
But that apparently wasn't even considered at this time.
It looks like though some individuals may have been helpful in getting the Jews out and done a great deal, listening to their own conscience, the church leadership wasn't there when they were needed.
Yeah, well, the church really was concerned with things like, well, the Nazi doctrine on race, their concern was that the church should have the power to determine who is Catholic and who is not Catholic, and they objected to the Nazi race doctrine because it overlapped certain church policies, not because it effectively denied the human rights to a vast number of people.
Well, thank you very much, Pat, and we'd like to invite our listeners to write to us at the St. Louis Rationalist Society, Post Office Box 2931, St. Louis, Missouri 63130, or call us at 768-7698.